Okay, I don't think that's working. Oh, video's got us okay. And now I'll start recording and I'll just start talking. Hello, I'm Anne-Marie and today I'm joined by Linda Pettit. Linda has had a varied career. She's been a PR and corporate communication professional, a professor, dean, is a counselling psychologist, writer, author, coach and speaker. And nice to meet you, Linda.
Nice to meet you too.
So I'm going to open up with my first question, which is, how did you come across the 3 principles understanding, and did it change your life in any way?
Oh, well, that's quite a story. First of all, let me say, and I find that as I get to know a lot of people who've been sharing the 3 principles, that they had similar experiences, that I had a couple of insights on my own immediately before stumbling across the 3 principles that I think were preparing me for the understanding. And I can talk about that later. But first of all, let me say that I welcome this opportunity. I'm grateful for it. Thank you. It's good to meet you. It's good to be with you. And hopefully we can have a fun conversation. So I met the principles the day I met my husband, Bill Pettit. So it was on Valentine's Day in 2003. And I had been invited to come to West Virginia University's Medical Center to do a talk on the power of unconditional love in healing for all of the doctors, nurses, physical therapists, dentistry students, dentists who were on staff at the medical center. And the reason I was invited was that I'd become known as a leader in the area of offering holistic healing modalities to people in West Virginia. So the director of integrative medicine at the university, Dr. Greg Juckett, invited me to do this talk. And I almost didn't make it because a very big storm blew through West Virginia. It's a famous storm, dropped 30 inches of snow on Morgantown, West Virginia, where the talk was, and over 1.5 inches of ice on the town where I lived, which was about two hours south of the university. But I got there, and I gave the talk. And as part of my talk, I did a guided meditation. And I knew that that was something that a lot of the doctors just really poo-poo and saw as woo-woo. And so this doctor walked up to me after the talk. There was a whole line of people waiting to talk to me. And I knew he was a doctor because he wore a doctor's white lab coat. And he had a little badge on that said, Dr. Bill Pettit, director of the Sydney Banks Institute for Innate Health, which, of course, I didn't know what that was. All I saw was the Bill Pettit MD and thought, oh my gosh, this doctor has come to give me hell about doing a guided meditation and wanting to have that integrated in healing. But I saw right away that Bill was coming with good intention. He stepped toward me, he had a big smile on his face. He put out his hand and he said, I really enjoyed your talk. And I think we have a lot in common. I think that there are some things we both see that I'd love to build on for you. And I would love an opportunity to tell you about something that I've seen and that I share with my people in my psychiatric practice. And he said, I'd love to come and have lunch with you or dinner with you. I know you said you live 2 hours south, but we can meet in the middle. Well, I totally forgot about that for a while because I went over to another talk that I was doing at the university on transpersonal psychology, the power of intuition, synchronicity, and dreams in psychotherapy. And I did that talk. And this is significant. At the end of that talk, I had a moment where I felt like some power beyond my intellect took over my mouth, just kind of said, okay, be quiet for Linda, let me speak. And out of my mouth came this thing that I had never consciously thought before. And what I said was, all current psychotherapies are going to diminish and be replaced by a new understanding. And that is because our current psychotherapies innocently are often iatrogenic. Now, that's a word that means intrinsically harmful. And so I said that, and the audience just gasped. And I was floored and thought, where did that come from? I have never thought that. And a number of people came up, and my advisor from the program that I'd done my doctorate in, who was a participant in this workshop, came up and really started yelling at me and telling me that I had no evidence or research to support what I just said, and how dare I say such a thing, especially in the presence of so many students of psychology. And I was just horrified, Anne Marie and others. I was just horrified. I actually drove home that day in a state of utter panic. And I had visions of the licensing police in black SUVs showing up at my door to yank my license as a doctoral level psychologist. I just didn't know what that was about. So that is context. Within the next couple of months, I did meet Bill Pettit, and we did start dating. And within 3 months, we were engaged. In 7 months after the day we met, we got married. And that was how I brushed up against the three principles understanding, the formal understanding. And I've said this many times publicly, I was not an easy study. It was not an immediate sink. It was not an immediate sort of, oh my gosh, I found the thing I've been looking for. As a matter of fact, it was 2 years before I really became a student of the understanding. I fought it pretty hard for a lot of reasons, I think. And it was just a gradual process of seeing an unfolding with it. And I know you asked how it changed things. I want to make the point that it was very slow and incremental. I know that there are people out there. I worked with some who've had such deep and immediate insights that their life changed instantly, kind of like Sid's did. But that was not the case for me. And I even had the good fortune to go and be with Sydney Banks, the man who first shared this understanding with the world, probably in November, a couple of years after Bill and I were married. Sid invited Bill and I out to Salt Spring, and I had the distinct impression that he wanted to check me out as one of his principal teacher's new wives. And he was delightful. He was very low key. He was very friendly. He was sweet. And all I can say is that in his presence, my mind went really quiet, and I couldn't even think of questions to ask him except for two. And I'll share. First one I asked him was, I was more interested in him than I was the understanding that he had. I'm just curious about this guy who my husband, who was a psychiatrist, and so many other people that I'd met called their primary spiritual teacher. What's that about, and what's that like? And so I said to him, we were walking together in Ganges on Salt Spring. Bill had gone ahead with Sid's wife, Judy. So I had a private moment with Sid. And I said, Sid, what is it like for you to be a spiritual teacher of this understanding that people say is life-changing? And he stopped on the sidewalk, and I stopped, and he turned and he looked and he faced me. And he had twinkly eyes, and he had kind of that Scottish brogue, and he had this chuckle in the brogue that was just so present. And he said, well, Linda, frankly, it's quite boring. Now, I don't know what I expected a spiritual teacher but it was not that. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, the understanding that I'm trying to teach people is really simple, but they don't see it. And it's just boring to say the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And he said, but Linda, what happens is that people get hooked on the metaphor of the three principles, and they don't see what I'm using the metaphor to point to. And what I'm pointing to is pure love. And I don't know, there was something about that probably kept me going through the initial couple years of not being able to see a whole bunch. Because all my life, I had a conscious desire to know what love was. It started back when I was a very small child. And I thought, oh, this man knows something that he can teach me about love. And that's worth paying attention to. So I talked with Sid. I spent time with Sid. Sid would call our home just about every Sunday, sometimes every other Sunday, because he was constantly mentoring Bill. And we would lay on the bed together, Bill and I, and put the phone between us and just listen. And Sid would talk. And when he would call us and talk to us, he would talk about the principles, but his language was very, very deeply spiritual. It's more like the language you hear if you read his books, Second Chance and In Quest of the Pearl, or the books that Linda Quiring wrote, Beyond Beliefs and Island of Knowledge. He would talk about the great allness and the great nothingness and the great isness and the great isn'tness. And a lot of it was totally beyond my comprehension. But I know that I felt really peaceful and really comforted, really quiet when I would listen to him. And I liked that feeling. And so it felt worthwhile to stay with it and see what might unfold for me in terms of being able to be in that feeling more of the time. So there were two things that I saw happening personally and professionally. And I think I saw more clearly what was happening first professionally. Because as I started to see the principles of mind, thought, and consciousness, and that they were universal, that they described how life operated for everybody, my anxiety as a counselor and counseling psychologist started to drop very dramatically. I had this persistent feeling when people would come in to see me, and I'd been practicing at that point for over 20 years. I had this persistent feeling when a new client would walk in the door, oh my goodness, what if I don't know how to help them? What if they commit suicide? What if they're homicidal? What if they're so desperately in need and I just don't know what to offer them? And, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual in psychology by that point had over 400 disorders, I think. And how do you get on top of treatment planning and diagnosis and conceptualizing for 400 different kinds of mental illness? It's just mind-boggling. But when I saw the principles and I saw that there was really only one cause of mental illness, and that was innocent misuse of thought, insecurity, and inability to see the divine wisdom that is guiding us always behind life. And there's one cure for that, and that is for people to see those things, and that it can be taught accessibly through this three principles understanding. My anxiety levels just started to drop very dramatically. And I felt a new confidence as a helper when people came in to see me, that I had something really very profound and very powerful to offer them. And at first I didn't have a lot. I know I've talked about this in other public forums, but when I decided to go back into therapy practice, because I had actually quit my therapy practice, I was feeling a little burned out and I had moved into the coaching field. But I was so taken by what Sid and others were pointing to related to the principles that I decided to reopen my psychotherapy practice. And I talked to Sid right before I did that. It was very easy for me to do. I was a pretty well-known psychologist, so people started to sign up for appointments right away as soon as I put my shingle back out again in the group practice that I had belonged to. And I talked to Sid about it, and I said, Sid, I don't have the kind of metaphors that other three principles teachers have. I can't be a Bill Pettit. I can't talk about it the way George Pransky does. I can't talk about it the way Roger Mills or Jack Pransky or Sandy Crott or, any of the others who were longstanding teachers. I just don't have their articulateness with it. I don't have their metaphors. And Sid said to me, well, what do you see, Linda? Tell me a metaphor that works for you. And so I told him that I saw that thought was like a river, that thought boats were flying by on the river all the time, and that I was on the shore, but that a lot of the time I would jump onto a thought boat and I would give it gas. And I said, Sid, I'm a water skier and I used to be in boats all the time. And I know that if you punch the throttle forward on a boat really fast, the boat will tend to go in a circle and you're at high risk of throwing yourself out of the boat. I learned that by almost doing it once. And I said, but sometimes I do that with my thinking. I get in, I give it gas, I hit that throttle to the max. And the next thing you know, my thought boat is circling around in the river and I'm in the water and I'm a mess. And all kinds of other thought boats are piling on top of it. Well, Sid is on the other end of the phone in Salt Spring, hearing this metaphor, laughing himself silly, just laughing. And he said, and he got quiet and he said, Linda, that is a rudimentary metaphor, but it's beautiful because it's yours and it's coming straight from your heart. And anything you share like that will go straight into the heart of others. So I took confidence from that, I guess, took some comfort in that. And when I started back into my practice, I made a decision that I was only going to share the three principles. I wasn't going to do anything else. And I never deviated. I deviated from that only once in the following 20 some years. And I was just astonished. The proof was in the results. I mean, I was so skeptical of the understanding that I decided I was going to test anyone I shared it with multiple psychological tests. So everyone got the OQ42, which is a very extensive symptom inventory, the Beck depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive scales, and a few others. So I was measuring results with each session. And I started to see that I was seeing drops on those scores from moderate to severe levels into mild or non-existent levels in very short periods of time. And that was very telling to me. It really kept me going. I thought, okay, I'm not hurting people. I'm clearly helping them and helping them far better, far faster, far deeper than I had been doing before. I want to say real clearly that I do not in any way diss my psychology upbringing, nor can I say that the people that I worked with before I saw the three principles didn't get better. I would be lying to you. And I can't do that because it's just not true. But what I saw, two things, the principles were operating from the moment I took my first breath. So they were operating even as I was sharing other psychological understandings. Wisdom was coming through, and I was finding ways to share even those older understandings that went beyond them, that were my take on them. I had seen very quickly that there was no point in taking people into the past. But I had a way of handling story that I now realize was wisdom. But when I started to share the 3 principles, I saw that the work became just efficient. And I also saw that it was a non-religious way to bring the spiritual into my work. And I had been looking for a way to do that from the time I first entered the field of helping. So I went from being a somewhat anxious, kind of driven, a little bit obsessive compulsive therapist to a therapist who felt confident, free, enervated, in so much joy to do the work that I was doing. I often say, and I really mean this, that when I saw the 3 principles, my work became meditation. I would end the day tired from sitting in a chair, but my mind and my heart, my spirit felt refreshed, like I'd been sitting in this place of quiet presence the whole day and just going with whatever came to me to share. And it was really beautiful. So on the personal side, I experienced the same thing. I've never been a depressive person, nor can I say, oh, I was really an anxious person. I never knew a moment of happiness. That just would be totally untruthful. I was a really happy person. I really enjoyed my life. I had great relationships in my life. I had great work. I had great friends. I had had one phenomenal marriage that ended in my husband's death. I had a beautiful daughter. I had a great family. But I had periods of very significant anxiety that would culminate sometimes in panic attacks. And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand how I could go back and forth between these periods of being pretty darn good, thriving, and periods where I could barely function. I was in so much anxiety and panic. And that just bewildered me. And I gradually saw, as I began to see some of the insights that came to me, what was happening and how not to let it happen again, how to make different choices so that over time I completely lost my anxiety. I haven't had a panic attack in 20 years and became much less driven, much less obsessive compulsive. And by that I mean, I like to order, but I like to order excessively. I'll tell one little story on myself, and then I'm going to stop and just see where you'd like to take this, Anne-Marie. About 6 months after I went back into my practice of psychology in Parkersburg, West Virginia, the owner of the practice asked me to speak with the administrative staff. They were struggling with just some conflict and workload and team issues. And she asked me to just talk to them a little bit about the principles, because she said, Linda, I know that you're really changing. Things are really different for you. I can feel your calmness. I can feel like it goes really deep, and maybe you have something to offer them. And so I sat with them and I shared a little bit about the principles. And one of them, her name was Pick. Her nickname was Pick. Really loved her because she had been so helpful to me in the early stages of my grief over my husband's death. She was just so present, so loving, and so caring. And she said to me, Linda, I know, and we've talked about it in the office, that something really different is occurring for you. You've really changed. Well, this astonished me.
Sorry.
I said, really? How do you see that I changed? And Pick said to me, well, she sat on the side of the office where she could hear down the hallway where the back door was into the practice. And she said, I listen for you to come in the morning because I know about the time that you're going to hit the door. And I kind of peek down the hall, make sure it's you, watch you go into your office. And then I go into the kitchen and I pour you a cup of coffee. She made me a cup of coffee every morning. And I walk down the hall to bring it to you. And on the way down, before you met Dr. Bill and you started learning this 3 principles understanding, I would always be thinking, oh my God, did I remember to put everything in her office in order? Because after I would leave the practice to go home, other therapists, evening therapists, would use my office. And sometimes they'd take out my toys for kids and play with them. And sometimes they'd move things around on my desk. And sometimes they'd move things around on my table. But what I didn't know was that the office staff in the morning would always try to make sure they went to my office and made sure all my toys were put away and all my things were put away and that everything on my table was put exactly as I liked it in angles on my desk. And I said to her, Pick, I can't believe you did that. And I said, Pick, did I yell at you? Was I ever upset with you about that? And she said, not really, but you would come to the office with this look on your face and you would say, who was in my office last night? And she said, it wasn't that we were afraid of you. We knew that you were just a loving human being, but we would feel like we disappointed you. Like somehow we made your life harder. And she said, but since you found this 3 principles understanding, not once have you ever come and said anything to us about putting your life back in order. So that was really interesting to me. I thought, wow, people know us better than we know ourselves. They see things that we don't see. And it was kind of sad for me that I had done anything to these people I loved that made them be on edge or caused them to be a little anxious or worried. So I think that was my opening sort of awareness that I was becoming softer and that I was becoming gentler and that I was becoming more compassionate, that I didn't lose my love for order. I have never lost my love for order, but I'm much less upset by it when things aren't orderly. And I'm much gentler with the people around me who sometimes may contribute to this disorder. And in that, you may read my husband, Bill Pettit. Bill and I are opposites in the area of order. And so my ability to be gentler about all that has helped me be gentler with our differences. So I'll stop there and see what you'd like to explore.
As part of my prep for our conversation now, and it goes back to before we came across the 3 principles understanding, but I think it's very spiritual and it's probably relevant. You were speaking on another YouTube thing I saw of you about when you met your first husband and how you knew he was the man you were going to marry. Would you mind talking about that a bit?
No, not at all. Because that is one of the biggest, even if not the biggest change in my understanding. It's in the spiritual realm, but that was something that unfolded over time. The more immediate insights were about thought and how I innocently misused thought to make my life harder and the lives of other people harder. I met my first husband when I was about 24 years old, and I met him the night he walked into his sister's house with a bottle of Jim Beam whiskey. And I knew because my friend, his sister Denise, had told me that he was a Roman Catholic priest and that he was a missionary. He'd been living in the Philippines as a missioner for many years. And that the only reason he was stateside was that he developed a problem with alcoholism and he was going into treatment the next morning. So he walked in the door, he rode his motorcycle to his sister's house. It was snowing, so he was covered with snow. His nose was covered with snow. His chin had snow drip icicles on it. And he walks in with this bottle of Jim Beam, swings it up. It's in a bag, a little brown paper sack. And he said, "I've come to share my last drink with Jim Beam with you." And his sister Denise introduced him to me. And we spent a wonderful night around the dinner table, just getting to know each other with my friend Denise and her soon-to-be husband, Larry. And I just enjoyed the evening. I just was captivated by him. He was the gentlest soul I had ever met, and I just knew that. He was a beautiful human being. I couldn't imagine how he had become alcoholic, frankly. And that night I went home and I got in the bathtub and I had a little journal thing that I was writing in. And I wrote in my journal, "I've just met the man I'm going to marry." And I looked at the words on the page and I thought, that's crazy. I'm a very religious woman. I was raised Catholic. I went to church every week. I practiced Catholic. I taught catechism to children. I was involved in a young ministry program for single Catholics. I mean, I was embedded in Catholicism. And that I would write in my journal that I was going to marry a man who was prohibited from being married, who had vowed to celibacy, which all Catholic priests do, was horrifying. But I looked at that and I thought, yeah, that's true. I'm going to marry that man. And I also thought, and I'm not going to do a thing to seduce him. I would never do that. I don't know what that's about, but I'm just going to puzzle it. Just going to be in the mystery of it. So it's a story that will be addressed fully in my memoir when it comes out. My memoir is called Leaning into Curves, because one of the things Jim taught me was to lean into curves with him on the motorcycle. We traveled over 200,000 miles together on our bike. But what I really saw was love, that behind our thinking and behind ritual and behind dogma, there's just one thing, and that's love. And we fell in love. And the love was very deep, and it was very pure, and it was big for both of us. We couldn't resist the forces of it. And yet we had our process over 2 years of working our way through, what do we do with this love that seems to be calling us, and this religion that we're embedded in and that we feel so strongly about. And eventually we found our way to deciding that we wanted to honor the love that was between us, get married. And we went on, had a beautiful daughter, and were married for 18 years. I was 24. Jim was 44. He was 20 years older than I was. And looking back, I was the one who kept bringing us back to love and saying, love is the answer. If we just stay in this feeling of love, we will know what to do. And as I was writing my memoir, I went back and read all the journals I was keeping at that time. And I was astonished that as a 24-year-old woman, I was writing some of the things I wrote about love. I read those things and I was like, wow, love was coming through me perfectly. The principles were operating perfectly. The thing I didn't see so clearly was what to do with all the thinking that kept obscuring the love. But somehow I knew to keep coming back to that, but I didn't understand the logic of it. And so I would lose it and then I'd come back to it. I'd lose it and then I'd come back to it. And I was really puzzled by that. My first business that I founded was called Wisdom Sources. And this was before the principles for me. And what I wanted to do was to help people see that wisdom was in everybody, that love and wisdom were in everybody, and help them find that. But I was so curious because I knew that I didn't totally have that sometimes I had it and sometimes I didn't. And I was looking for the answer for that. I knew that somehow there was something beyond the religion that I'd grown up with that was in the religion that I grew up with, but had gotten messed up by a lot of thinking. I knew there was something to find, and that when I found it, it would be really special.
It's also interesting to me that there seem to be a lot of parallels between your early life and Bill's early life, because when he was talking about the way he was brought up into Catholicism, and I believe he was studying to become a priest at one stage.
He was.
Yeah, so it made me go goosebumpy thinking about it. It almost seems like, I don't know, not saying he's the same person, but it seems like you've been drawn together for a purpose both times.
Yeah, I think so. It was so funny. About a year before I met Bill, and after my first husband had died, a dear friend of mine encouraged me to do a vision board. And I thought, at the time, I just had a back surgery and I was kind of laid up, and I thought, yeah, why not? So I was putting all these beautiful pictures of things on the vision board, and I put this picture of a pretty hunky looking male body on my vision board, and I cut the head off, and I just put a question mark where the head was. But then I had all these little pictures around them, and one of them was a set. It was a picture that I found in a magazine, a set of the books by Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton is a very famous Catholic theologian who curiously died the year I was born. And he had written some powerful books, including Seven Story Mountain, which I'd read, and Seeds of Contemplation, which I'd read. And when I put that picture on that vision board, my thought was, I will meet a man who is deeply spiritual and will be able to enjoy that consciously in our relationship. So the first date I had with Bill, we meet at Oliverio's restaurant in Bridgeport, West Virginia. And afterwards, he says to me, we have this amazing kiss on the steps of Oliverio's that I'm like vibrating. And he says to me, would you like to come back to my house? Maybe we could watch a movie. And so I said, yeah, why not? So we drove 45 minutes up to his house. He excused himself for a minute. I was wandering around his study, his office, and there on his bookshelf was a set of the books of Thomas Merton. And I was like, oh, first of all, that's phenomenal. I'm being guided, and I had other guidances that I was being guided to be in relationship with him. I just didn't know if it was meant to be personal or professional. And so, yeah, I feel like the guidance behind life moved us together for a purpose, and that we've been serving that purpose for 20 years. And I think part of it was for me to see that something he had seen, 20 years before me. And that was this beautiful understanding that allowed me to resolve many of the questions that I had about God, not the mystery of God. Good God. I can't wait I can wait, but I can't wait until I die. And, I often joke and say, I know when I hear that machine flatlining, when I'm laying in that hospital bed, that the next thing that's going to happen is that the full illumination of mind is going to be born. Sid said that, and somehow I know that's right. And that's really cool. And all the mystery will be revealed to me. So I'm just kind of really looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I'm enjoying exploring the human side of the mystery.
I was just going to ask, do you believe in signs then? Because you're talking about those books by Thomas Merton, was it? And I'm just thinking, because the only reason I'm thinking about it is I've got my dog on my knee at the moment, and she was a rescue, and her name's Molly, and Molly was my grandmother's nickname. And also she was born the day after my father's birthday, and I got the call from the Dogs Trust a week before Christmas that she was available. And I always took those as signs that she was meant to be. Do you believe in things like that?
Oh, I absolutely do. And I absolutely know that the more spiritually involved you become, the more you see them. the more your third eye is open, the more your spiritual understanding expands, the more you will see the interconnectedness and the oneness behind life. And that will show up as intuition, and it will show up as synchronicity. Absolutely. You know, when I met Bill that first day, actually the first meeting in the at the university, when he walked up to me and introduced himself, he was carrying a little blue book. It's called Coming Home by his first wife, Sue Pettit. Many of you may have heard of it. It's a lovely book of poetry. And he handed it to me and he said, I'd like to share something with you that's very meaningful to me. And it's a book that my first wife, my late wife, Sue, wrote. I hope you enjoy it. He stuck his business card in it. And I drove home that night. And as I had said earlier, there was a big storm coming through West Virginia. So when I got home, I barely made it up to my home on the top of the hill. And the ice started to come down. Trees were falling. The power went out. I was alone in my house. Fortunately, I had a wood stove, so I had heat because we were without power in very bitter weather for over 10 days. And that night I thought, well, can't do anything but wait for this thing to pass. So I pulled my recliner up to the fireplace so that I could sit close to it, wrapped myself in blankets, put a little battery-powered miner's light on my head, and picked up the book that Bill had given me and thought, now I'm going to read this book this guy gave me. And I opened it to a page that was a poem that focused on turtles. It's actually a poem about separate realities. It's a real sweet little poem about a day that Sue took her children to the zoo. But the whole page was on turtles. And I gasped because my late husband's Amakua was the turtle. His spirit animal was the turtle. He had lived in the islands for 20 years of his life. He had been exposed to spiritualities that are very nature-based, and he very much believed in the oneness behind life. And he had turtles all around our house. He wore turtle shirts all the time. Clients, he was an addictions counselor. Clients gave him turtles all the time. There were hundreds of turtles that I had to rehome once he died. So when I saw that, my first thought was, a shiver, a knowing shiver just shot through my body. And my first thought was, you are meant to have a relationship with this man. What I didn't know, again, was whether it was going to be personal or professional. And Sid speaks about this. In The Second Chance, when he's talking about his character, Richard, being drawn toward Lahaina and to Jonathan, one of the spiritual teachers, he says twice that as he was coming into Lahaina, as he was driving into Lahaina, a shiver went through his body, an energy passed through his body, and he felt drawn by a current he couldn't resist to some destination. And the second time he talks about it, I think this is fascinating. He says, that current, that energy was as tangible as the sidewalk I walked on. We don't talk about that a lot in the Three Principles world, but I found it very fascinating that Sid bowed to that in his first novelette and said that the energy that moves through us, the formless energy as it takes form, we will experience it in the form and sensation. And it's as real as the things we can't see. So yes, signs are, synchronicities are, intuitions are, dreams are, and they're all manifestations of spirit in the form.
As we've got 15 minutes left, I'm going to open it up to see if anybody's got any questions for you or comments. I'm going to check YouTube as well, just in case we put the comments on there.
Sure.
Just unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Don't be shy.
Sue looks like she wants to say something. Not that I'm picking on you, Sue. Sorry, I'm just going to think first.
Yeah, if you don't mind Excuse me, there's something catching in my throat. Couple of things. I just want to, before I do anything, I just want to clarify for people that the reason I signed in initially as someone else is because as Linda is because I volunteer as technical support for heartfelt presence, so that's why I was signed in as someone else. I had just downloaded the last Coach Connection and was working on it when I come on here. Anyway, that's another thing altogether. Hello, Linda. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Of course, I know about you, although I'm pretty in the background, and that's cool. I like it that way.
Me too.
Yeah, I once heard, and I've been saying now for probably about a year, I once heard Bill say on a YouTube video that the three principles are a metaphor, and I heard it, and no one else seemed to be saying that, and I thought, I've got to get on a call and I've got to ask Bill, what do you mean by that? Well, Linda, thank you. You've just clarified what he meant, and the way you explained that Sid would have that conversation with you, well, that just made it all the more real. Because I had known to some degree that this is a metaphor. This is something that Sydney Banks is using to point to truth. It's not what it's all about, really. And that was why I was curious I wanted to pin Bill down and say, right, what do you mean by that, right? So you've saved your husband my interrogation.
That's sweet.
And another thing was that I totally you made me laugh when you that metaphor, the river and the boat's gone past and you jump on. That was, to me, that was just, I've used that metaphor. I just didn't jump on the boats. Right, and I didn't know about the spin, so that just makes it, yeah, that's. And if you don't mind, I will reference you. If you don't mind, I would like to borrow that metaphor from time to time.
Oh, most definitely. You can use it freely. And you don't even have to credit me. It was the best mine could do at my level of understanding at that point.
It was awesome. It was awesome. I thought so anyway.
So interesting, because I've been I'm a seeker, certainly, but someone who loves to read about the spiritual all my life. So I've read across a lot of different traditions. And the thing that I realized was that other people who've written, mystics and spiritual teachers who've written, often speak profoundly about mind, about God, about essence, whatever you want to call that formless energy. And many of them have spoken very directly about the fact that it is formless. I can find that going all the way back to the 12th century. Many have spoken about consciousness. You can find that going back to the 12th century. But what I never was able to find was anyone else who spoke about thought. I found some who spoke about the world as a mental creation of the divine mind, but none who spoke with precision about the bridge of thought that Sid spoke of, that's the way we bridge the spiritual and the psychological, and that's the way everything is created. And that's powerful. That's revolutionary. That's incredible. And that's why the metaphor to me is so powerful. It gives us an accessible way to talk about something that is formless.
Can I come back?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's okay. Because one of the I used to be, it doesn't matter what I used to be. I happen to know that in which I found very interesting, is that in the Bible, in Romans, I think it's Romans 12. I don't know. I don't do chapter and verse like that. But I do know that somewhere, I think it's Romans, I think it's chapter 12, it says, be renewed by the, what is it? I don't believe I'm going to forget it now. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So it's there. Yeah.
It is. It is. And there are scholars who believe that some of the earliest teachings about mind and thought were actually scrubbed because they were so threatening to the political and religious powers that were at that time. Some of the older fragments, you get a clearer sense of. In fact, one of the fragments that has been discovered does talk about mind, but it's broken off before the thought is developed. So I kind of wonder if the understanding was much clearer and much purer initially.
If you don't mind my saying, the Dhammapada, which is a Buddhist piece of text, actually starts with I don't remember the sentence exactly, but it does start with something along the same lines as the mind being, or the thought being, the most troubling of our experience. So it's there, it's out there, you know, and all these things, just for me, they just clarify for me and solidify even, and make real what Sydney Banks was saying. Yeah. So
Truth is everywhere. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, Sydney Banks said that all religions are the same thing. So don't stop practicing your religion if you are religious, because they're all saying the same thing.
One of my favorite little experiences of him was very sweet, very simple. We were walking. Again, it was in Ganges and on Salt Spring, and there was an art gallery we passed. There was a painting in the picture that had religious themes. I don't remember it really clearly, but multiple religious themes. And Sid stopped and he looked at me and looked at the picture, and he said, "That's very beautiful. All those forms are beautiful, but Linda, in the end, all forms will pass away, and what will be left is truth."
I'm mindful we've only got 5 minutes left, so has anybody got any other comments and or questions? And if not, Linda, you said you're working on your memoir. Is that publication yet, or when can we expect to be able to buy that?
Yeah, it's in process. I'm working on revisions. Probably, I would guess probably the first half of next year.
Okay, and I'll put, when I do the description on the video, I'll put a link to your website on as well. So
thank you very much.
Has anybody else got any questions or comments before I wrap it up? No. Ooh, someone just taken. Okay. Unless you got anything, Linda, you'd like to add before we say goodbye. Okay, I'll call a close to it now then. And thanks for coming, everybody. And it's lovely speaking to you, Linda, and lovely meeting you.
Lovely meeting you too. Thank you all for joining me, both here on the Zoom screen and those of you who hopped into YouTube. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Xander.
Thanks for reminding me to record.
Okay. Bye.